Thanks so much, Sandra, for that introduction to the subcommittee. Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone has had a great week we're closing out the conference today on day 4 with, there's been several side discussions and questions and comments made alluding to this forthcoming report from the NSF Committee on the Future of NSF EPSCoR. So what we're going to do this morning, I'm Kelly Rush. I'm from North Dakota State University. I am the Executive Director of the North Dakota EPSCoR State Office. My co-chair, Jose, intended to be with us today from Penn State. Unfortunately, he fell ill and is unable to make it. So you'll be spending the next 2 hours with me. What we're going to do this morning is I'm going to present a lengthy summary of what the committee has worked on with recommendations and suggestions. And then in the first hour of this morning, in the second hour, we'll be moving into breakout rooms because we would really love all the participants to enter into a discussion of what you heard during this first hour. We are in the process of finalizing this report, so we would like to capture thoughts from this group, this group of stakeholders today, just to kind of reconcile with what we believe to be the final report and make any last edits and changes that are necessary. So I'll discuss more about the breakout sessions when I'm done presenting. And so many of you already know that, there has been work going on by the NSF Committee on the Future of NSF EPSCoR. The work's been going on for about 8 months or so now. And so what I'm going to go through today is kind of give you an overview of the work, the task we undertook over the last 8 months or so, our findings, our recommendations and suggestions. And I'm going to discuss the difference between a recommendation and suggestion and explain why we've broken the report into those 2 specific components. And then hopefully have enough time for questions before we may move into the breakout sessions. So everyone knows, we're at the NSF EPSCoR PI meeting. So, EPSCoR is designed to enhance research competitiveness of the jurisdictions that are EPSCoR jurisdictions through strengthening our jurisdiction's capacity and capability in STEM areas. About a year ago, NSF put out an Envisioning the Future of NSF EPSCoR Dear Colleague letter and asked for nominations and applications to be submitted for folks who were interested in serving on the NSF Committee on the Future of NSF EPSCoR. So this committee is guiding a visioning process that will culminate in this final report that provides recommendations and suggestions back to NSF for their thought process of moving forward. How can NSF EPSCoR be even more efficient and proactive in meeting its mission and ensuring impact within the jurisdictions? Approximately 50 or so applications were received last summer. The committee was 19 folks from around the country were selected to be on the committee. We had an early departure, so the committee worked with 18 people. NSF is ex officio to this work and has been present with all of our committee meetings and has been a great source of factual question answering of questions we had, data collection, and we also I'd be remiss if I did not also at this point mention Trey Wan, who is the contractor working with us. Without their work, none of us could have accomplished what we have. Behind the scenes, they have been instrumental and very critical to this entire process. So some of the folks on this list are on the in the PI meeting, and you may recognize other names of colleagues you have around the country who have worked very hard since last August in thinking through what the future of NSF EPSCoR may look like. To start the committee's work, there were our charge to us was that we had to consider 2 major motivating questions. The first one was taking a look at all available evidence and what does that tell us about the effectiveness of the current NSF EPSCoR investments in their programs, from an individual level to an institutional level, all the way to the jurisdiction-wide impacts. So that was step one. And once we were able to take a look and gather evidence, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes, then to step back and say, okay, what are there novel strategies or changes to the current strategies that NSF EPSCoR implements that would make jurisdictions, make the work of NSF EPSCoR more effective, but also help jurisdictions increase their capacity and capabilities and increase their jurisdictional impact. So we had a twofold charge. One is to look, spend some time looking at the evidence, and then the second piece is to capture data of moving forward, what additional things could be done or what could be changed to make the whole process more efficient. In order, because there's so much data that we had available to us, and to try to organize it, to dig as deep as we could, we organized the committee around 4 working groups: research infrastructure, capacity and competitiveness, education and workforce development, broadening participation, and economic development. And so that enabled subsets of the committee members to really dig deep into the data around that working group topic versus having to try to grapple with all the data conceptually together. And then the committees overlapped and discussed their findings in order to see where there cross-cutting areas that cut across all the working groups to try to tie everything back together. And when we get to the second hour, the breakout rooms are, the 4 breakout rooms are around these 4 working groups, and we'll discuss it at the end of this presentation. So beginning our kickoff meeting was last August of 2021. And we went over, and NSF gave us our charge. We went over various data that documents that were available to us. And NSF and Trey Wan went through and our SharePoint drive and said, here's what you have so far. So we had past solicitations, committee of visitor reports for EPSCoR, internal, external visioning documents that have been done in the past, and external evaluation. So that's a set of documents we were able to look at. In addition to any additional data that a committee member may have requested from NSF, and NSF was very responsive in data mining for us and providing data to any of the requests made. You may recall we did put out a website with soliciting public comments. We gave 3 prompts to that. It was open between September and November of last year, and we received 49 respondents who answered the 3 questions that were in the public comments. So we did capture some public comments. We also then organized 6 listening sessions. Some of the audience listening today may have been a participant in one of those listening sessions. Each session targeted a different stakeholder group. One was around the track 1, another was around government officials, the state steering committees, organizations like that. Another was around minority serving institutions, primary undergrad institution, tribal colleges, to get their input. And so we had 6 of those different topic specific listening sessions that took place between September and October of last year. And in total, we had 123 participants. We certainly could have had hundreds of more participants, but we intentionally kept each listening session below 30 invited participants in order to have a vibrant dialogue. Certainly we could have opened it up and had hundreds of participants at each session, but then folks would not have had a chance to provide their input. So taking all that, the documents we have, the additional data requested, the public comments, the listening session data that we collected, that all then culminated in the subcommittee working on an interim report, which we already have presented to CIAS. CIAS is the Committee on Equal Opportunities in Science and Engineering, a congressionally mandated committee. Our report actually goes to CIAS, and then they will provide it to NSF. So we gave a presentation to CS on February 18th of our interim findings. So we will also then, Jose and I will be presenting to CS, I believe it's on June 15th, to provide them our final report findings with our recommendations, final recommendations and suggestions. We also will be organizing a workshop. This workshop was intended to be last fall as a data gathering workshop, but as you can see with all the work that was done from August to December, there simply was no time to really organize this workshop. So we will be hosting a virtual workshop webinar in the August-September timeframe of this year that will be kind of a report out, a presentation, a dissemination of this final report. So be on the lookout for that coming up in early fall. So again, we had two major motivating questions that we were charged to address. So again, one is, what does available data tell us about the current effectiveness and impact of NSF EPSCoR programming? And beyond that, moving into the future, what are some areas where NSF could provide additional investments that will help jurisdictional partners to more effectively achieve their missions? So delving in a summary format into that question number one, I have some bullet items of some of the data and some of the conclusions we came to, just to try to summarize. Certainly the report itself is much more detailed, and when that comes out later this year, everyone will have access and be able to read it. So one of the key findings for those of you that are long-term EPSCoR folks, particularly in the track one, we've discussed a lot in our meetings that approximately 10% of the total funding, NSF R&D funding, goes to EPSCoR states. We've inched our way up 2 percentage points in about 2016. We're a little over 12% now. So we have moved the needle a little bit by about 2 percentage points in terms of collective NSF R&D funding to the EPSCoR jurisdictions. A key finding from about 8-9 years ago that that is key, because it comes up a lot, that we lose our faculty, we lose folks to non-EPSCoR states. But in 2013, 78% of EPSCoR funded faculty, NSF EPSCoR funded faculty, remained on staff at a university or college in the original jurisdiction. And that's key, because a lot of times we have a perception that we're losing all of our faculty to non-EPSCoR states, but that's a key finding that shows that we actually are retaining those investments within our jurisdictions to continue to build our jurisdictions. Our research facilities and science and education, science and engineering education programs have grown substantially by since 2014. We've had, by 2014, we've had 66 new research centers and 83 new or upgraded laboratory facilities, and more than 100 degree programs, which include 64 PhD programs, have been developed within our EPSCoR jurisdiction. So we're also, not only on the research side are we moving our infrastructure, human and physical, forward, we're also advancing our educational opportunities for students who attend colleges and universities within EPSCoR jurisdictions. Moving forward in the last set of data in fiscal year 2020, NSF EPSCoR invested, and we've heard some of this, Sandra was given some of these numbers earlier this week. NSF EPSCoR has invested a total of almost $192 million. So there's 3 areas they fund in. Of that 192, just shy of 149 of it was directed to the research infrastructure improvement program, about 42 to the co-funding, and just shy of 2 million went to these outreach activities and workshops. And that's in addition to what's already embedded in the research infrastructure improvement program. So this is additional funds to do outreach and to fund workshops on specific topics. In a recent Committee of Visitors report findings, right? So one of the most recent ones out there, their findings was that the EPSCoR program supports agency-wide priorities. So we are not, EPSCoR office is not disconnected from the priorities across NSF as a whole. So that they are funding things that the jurisdictions then can funnel into agency-wide priorities. The portfolio has supported programs and projects that span a range of emerging and innovative ideas. Again, thinking through NSF as an entire agency and where it's going. So setting up the jurisdictions to be more competitive in directorates that fund emerging and innovative ideas. The workshops and conferences that have been held by EPSCoR, funded by EPSCoR, have offered an opportunity for NSF to disseminate EPSCoR's advancements and common challenges and opportunities across its jurisdictions, which has provided a wonderful venue for collaborative innovation and problem solving. One thing in my time within being involved with EPSCoR is that we do come together as an EPSCoR community quite often. And we did this week in some of the question answers, in the project PD council meetings, and talk about common challenges and opportunities within our jurisdiction, and says, hey, what are you doing that works for you? And that, I think, is a hallmark of EPSCoR, is that we do come together as a community and try to learn from one another to make our own jurisdictions better. And one of the key findings from this Committee of Visitors report is that NSF EPSCoR is committed to continuous improvement strategies for greater impact, which folds right into this national level committee looking at the future of NSF EPSCoR as we move into the recommendations and suggestions and how NSF EPSCoR will think about those and respond to them. And just one more kind of metrics type thing that try to put all this data together. It is a lot of data, and I want to put the caveat out there that this is not inclusive of every data piece available. I mean, it's a monstrous data set to go through all these reports, the data. So this is just a snapshot of what we were able to pull within since August of last year. From our research capabilities and creation of new knowledge, NSF EPSCoR, since 2017, NSF EPSCoR has supported more than 7,000 researchers and about 16,000 students. That's a large human capacity building activity and investment. Broadening the direct participation, 486 underrepresented graduate and undergraduate students involved in EPSCoR projects have attained their degrees in that time span. NSF EPSCoR has co-funded 210 career awards within EPSCoR jurisdictions. Affecting the engagement at the academic, government, and private sectors, NSF EPSCoR has engaged almost 10,000 faculty. There's been an inclusion of over 12,000 K-12 teachers in the investments through mostly through the RII track, and more than almost 310,000 K-12 students have been involved in some sort of outreach activity. So again, trying to blend the research aspects with our outreach, our STEM education pathways. And then from an impact, since 2017, there's been 64 new patents that have come out of the EPSCoR jurisdiction. So in addition to creating new knowledge, the jurisdictions are focused on that translation and moving that new knowledge out into the economic sectors within the jurisdictions and beyond for long-term jurisdictional impact. Just to give you a few quotes that we captured from the public comments and from the listening session participants about the available evidence. So this first quote came from a listening session participant that my entire lab was built on EPSCoR funding. And you can read faster than I can speak. So I'm going to skip down to the blue highlighted piece. If we didn't have EPSCoR here, it would not have happened, period. So that is an impact. First and foremost, at an individual faculty member level. But then if you think about it, in moving that forward, because that faculty member was able to build his or her lab, he or she was able to engage and collaborate with other faculty members and engage and educate students. So you can start seeing the multiplicative effect of the impact that first started at the individual level and ripples out across the entire jurisdiction. From a public comment, NSF EPSCoR resulted in the ability to recruit top faculty, offer new degree programs and degrees, train thousands of students, and so on. So that was captured, the previous slide. This comment actually captures a lot of those and speaks to those metrics I just went over. But again, speaking to the critical importance of EPSCoR within EPSCoR jurisdictions. A few more comments now that, that's what the evidence told us. We've also had listening session participants provide input of some new strategies. We just picked out a few. So one suggestion was allowing jurisdictions to build collaborative proposals such as track 2s around priority focuses and strengths with NSF EPSCoR rather than limiting them to NSF specified areas. And that could really help strengthen individual EPSCoR jurisdictions and regional collaborative efforts that, for instance, were mostly rural states. So, agriculture, water, food, and those types of things are really allowing the selection of the jurisdictions versus driving it from an NSF specific topic would really help build regional efforts amongst the jurisdictions. And then the second comment basically goes to the track 1 in its 5-year period, in that they're 5 years. We're able to recruit new faculty members. They have to be mentored. And what this is really speaking to is the importance of the track 1, but it also lends itself into the sustainability of the track 1s. And I'll come back to speak about that in a few slides. So going back to available data, there is a lot of evidence out there that speaks to how NSF EPSCoR is advancing its mission towards its and meeting its program goals. Having said that, there's obviously room for more progress, to be more effective, to have more impact, right? There's a recent unpublished study, the 2M research report in 2020, that found on average that EPSCoR jurisdictions ranked lower than non-EPSCoR jurisdictions on 26 outcome variables related to human capital production, reputation and knowledge production, and economic development of high-tech industry. So thinking through those findings in this unpublished report and thinking through, okay, EPSCoR has had a great impact, right? The question is, so what now? What do we do into the future? How does NSF EPSCoR as an organization think about the future and think about these rankings of EPSCoR jurisdictions to non-EPSCoR jurisdictions, and how can the EPSCoR program invest more effectively, in addition to have even more impact within our EPSCoR jurisdictions, okay? So what does all that mean? The rest of my talk is going to focus on the recommendations and suggestions. So we gathered all this data, we held many meetings to discuss it all, and the committee developed 8 recommendations and 20 suggestions to help elevate EPSCoR jurisdictions to function as the backbone of American innovation. So let me pause for a minute and define a recommendation from a suggestion and why we have both. So when the final report is submitted and it makes its way back to NSF EPSCoR, recommendations, NSF EPSCoR will have to address recommendations. So if it's a recommendations, there will have to be a response to it. Suggestions are just that. Those are suggestions. NSF will look at them. They'll say, hey, that's a great suggestion, but there is not a mandated response that is needed. So the way the report is structured, the way the rest of this presentation is structured, There's 8 recommendations, and then underneath each recommendations, there's a set of suggestions here. And you'll notice that the recommendations are rather broad, and that is on purpose to provide flexibility for NSF EPSCoR to develop new programs, go in new directions, and decide on new investments. The suggestions have more of the details in them. Hey, we have this recommendation, but here are a set of suggestions that would work to meet that recommendation. So that's the difference between a recommendation and suggestion. Again, as I stated, we had 4 working groups. So of course, there's going to be some overlap, and sitting back and looking at the recommendations and work done by the working groups, Traywan, it was very critical in this and teasing out and helping us tease out where were there common recommendations, where were there overlaps. So there were actually common across all recommendations, 3 broad foci and ideas that supported all the other recommendations, and then diversity and inclusion undergirded all of the 3 foci. So it's a common, if you think of a thread going through, it's prevalent in everything we discuss going forward. So let's focus on those 3 broad foci and diversity and inclusion first, and then I'll follow up with the 4 different working group set of recommendations. So the first cross-cutting foci recommendation was expanding and supporting human capital, especially for underrepresented groups. So really broadly, speaking to NSF EPSCoR to support and expand efforts to recruit a greater number of STEM faculty, students, and supporting staff within NSF EPSCoR jurisdictions. That's a broad statement, right? And also to invest in programs and activities, provide continuous professional development throughout career trajectories and pathways. That was something that was discussed quite often, and making sure that it's not only about recruiting, but also about retaining and that professional development pathways that would help faculty progress through from assistant to full professors and beyond. Some of the suggestions that would go with this focus 1 area, and the italicized bullet is just a reminder that we face significant challenges in recruiting, mentoring, retaining high quality and diverse junior faculty. Okay, particularly of a broad, particularly when we think of it from a broadening participation. Okay. So one suggestion is for NSF to, and this has been discussed earlier this week or suggested earlier this week, to develop programs that support initiatives similar to NIH IDEA's COBRI program. For those of you that also are familiar with COBRI, these programs are specific to an institution. They recruit up to 5 junior faculty and provide them resources, mentorship, and to move them on to become successful independent scientists. Once they do that, and that is through the receiving federal funding, then they kind of graduate out of that program, and then the COBRI program recruits new faculty. And also the other thing about the COBRIs, it's a phase 1 through 3, so it's 3 5-year awards. So that is one suggestion that would fit this focus area of really enhancing our ability to not only recruit, but professionally develop our faculty in our EPSCoR jurisdictions. The second focus area was on strengthening resources and infrastructure. And that would be also to target investments, not only on equipment, but construction and modernization of our research facilities. When we looked at all the data, and that 2M report also spoke to it, even though we receive funds to get some equipment, we quickly a lot of times fall behind in maintaining labs that are modern, particularly at not only at the research universities, but particularly at our non-RU universities. And then the recommendation is to include technical assistance from NSF to further build capacity. So how could that, suggestions for implementation? Adjust EPSCoR program funding amount and duration to more accurately reflect the long timeline for sustainable capacity building and economic development. adding additional funding to existing funding instruments that support construction and modernization of our research facilities and infrastructure. The second suggestion was to develop an infrastructure database in partnership with EPSCoR state committees that would inventory our buildings and within our jurisdictions conditions of the research spaces. And this initiative would support our HBCUs, MSIs, TCUs, PUIs, and community college institutions, which really suffer from a lack of physical infrastructure. And by putting this database together, right? One, you can look at, are there opportunities for sharing across institutions, but also it provides a database for a further dialogue on the need of additional programs within this area of our state-of-the-art infrastructure. Focus 3 recommendation was on bridge building, and the bridge building within and across NSF EPSCoR and non-EPSCoR jurisdictions. The committee felt strongly that sometime, obviously we all know EPSCoR dollars must be spent in EPSCoR jurisdictions, rightfully so. But how do we bring in that expertise and broaden the collaborations of folks that are in non-EPSCoR jurisdictions? And how do we better do that through collaborative proposals aligned to NSF priority areas? Are there mechanisms where NSF EPSCoR could fund the EPSCoR jurisdiction part and other NSF directorates fund the other collaborative piece of it beyond the co-funding? So additional programs beyond co-funding. And also to expand our partnerships that work with private enterprises, centers, K-12 schools, community organizations, federal agencies. And the reasoning behind this was, building our capacity within an EPSCoR jurisdiction. Obviously, it begins, and the large focus is on research and as the nucleus. But the education and workforce development, the skilled education and workforce we need for the 21st century and to move our jurisdictions has to be raised to a level that is the same as the research, when we have to be building them in parallel and not lagging fashion. Okay, so are there additional programs to really support that side of our capacity building? Some of the suggestions around this focus 3, NSF can develop a big transformative ideals framework for EPSCoR jurisdictions only. The bridge building initiatives within this big transformer ideal framework, they would be led by EPSCoR PIs, and the non-EPSCoR co-PIs would be funded with non-EPSCoR dollars. So that, again, trying to allow us to expand beyond the EPSCoR jurisdictions through a specific program that is through a specific solicitation to build these bridges with non-EPSCoR jurisdictions that have complementary strengths and expertises. Okay. And the final one, which again is a thread that goes through everything we discuss, is inclusion and diversity. And how, the recommendation is to better broker inclusive and diverse partnerships, not only at the individual investigator level, but at the institutional level, underserved communities, and within K-12 schools. We all work in this area, and we know that it's easier said than done. And so the committee felt very strongly that there needs to be a concerted effort, additional efforts into the future that really look at diversity and inclusivity, right? The other piece of that was additional investments to engage students and faculty who aim to pursue STEM careers, but cannot come through a traditional career pathway. So what are the various pathways within our broader community? I mean, how many faculty and students are we missing? There was some talk about the missing millions. Who are we missing? And what can we do within EPSCoR jurisdictions to provide better and more effective trajectories and pathways that aren't linear, that may start, stop, that may have entry points at points we have at spots we haven't thought of. But so if we are going to progress as EPSCoR jurisdictions, we really need to grapple with this and come up with additional programs that would help support these efforts. So again, on suggestions of how to go about this, and I'm not going to read through all of them. You know, we have a time limit and I'm probably already over, getting close to my end of my hour, but I want to focus on bullet number 2 as you read the other ones. Building equitable collaborations that avoid a one-size-fits-all underrepresented institutions. And this was discussed quite broadly, you know, as we, and a lot of the, if you were part of listening sessions, we received some public comments. You know, there is a saying, if you've seen one EPSCoR jurisdiction, you have seen one EPSCoR jurisdiction. We are all different. Our only common denominator is we are EPSCoR jurisdictions. Beyond that, what happens in our jurisdiction, so I'm in North Dakota, is probably different than what happens in the jurisdiction of New Mexico. And so thinking through that statement and now looking at institutions, right? And really thinking through and looking at programs and collaborations that build on the strengths and interests and goals, institutional missions of these institutions versus saying we have the research universities and then we have another group of institutions that we want to engage, but yet we treat them all the same. So really thinking through the individuality of these different institutions and building more equitable collaborations that will ultimately result in greater sustainability and greater impact within the jurisdictions. All right, let me dive into the recommendations. Each working group came up with 2 recommendations, so that, you know, there's 4 working groups. So we have 8 recommendations. So I'm going to go through, it's going to be a linear process I go through, but keep in mind that none of this is linear. Everything needs to inform everything else. So I'll start with economic development. We'll take a look at the recommendations and then some of the suggestions, because this is really from these slides down are really the foundation for the second hour, which is the dialogue hour. So from an economic development perspective, the committee came up with 2 broad, again, the recommendations are broad. Recommendation 1 is an ecosystem approach to investments, and suggesting that NSF should partner with other federal agencies to create new programs for coordinated and long-term strategic investment that will ensure capacity and support from the basic science questions through commercialization, job creation, and workforce support, while also expanding and using the internal EPSCoR co-funding mechanism and considering programs to encourage collaboration between NSF and non-EPSCoR jurisdictions. That's about building this larger innovation ecosystem. The second recommendation is increased integration of NSF EPSCoR. NSF should adopt a more holistic view of NSF EPSCoR with greater integration of NSF EPSCoR across the foundation and more cross-fertilization between NSF EPSCoR office and the balance of the foundation. Now, let me be clear on this recommendation. This recommendation does not speak to dispersing NSF EPSCoR across NSF. NSF EPSCoR, the NSF EPSCoR office must and always must remain an entity, right? So this is not about saying just embed EPSCoR in the different directorates. This is about making sure the rest of NSF and its is integrated with the EPSCoR office and its programming and cross-fertilization. So there's much more education about EPSCoR across the entirety of the NSF agency, which will then lead to additional opportunities for internal programming, not only within the greater NSF, but between NSF jurisdictions and non-NSF jurisdictions. Thinking back to the data we collected, and this is, I pulled out one comment from a listening session participant, allowing jurisdictions to build collaborative proposals such as the track 2. And I brought this up earlier, right? And again, this fits in the economic development, as it's speaking to letting EPSCoR jurisdictions that have regional strengths come together, put in track 2s around those regional strengths, right? So they then can grow the capacity to be recognized as national leaders and build the economic capacity in strategic areas, right? So I've already kind of used this comment earlier, but in this sense, it's really focusing on allowing the track 2, right, to morph a little bit so we can build regional strengths that would elevate that region of EPSCoR jurisdictions to be leaders and lead economic capacity building for the nation. So within these two broader recommendations, there were a set of suggestions. And again, I don't have time to read each and every one. I'm not going to read the sub bullets. I'm only really going to focus on the bolded area. But basically, suggestion 1 is to create innovation ecosystems through enhanced investments in physical and human capacity, namely research teams, research administration, tech transfer offices, collaboration, state economic development agencies, and industry partnership opportunities that enable synergistic ecosystems to develop, support, and retain talent. Invest in brick and mortar innovation hubs to be co-located with universities. So that is the suggestion that would support the two recommendations I've already discussed. The second suggestion is to designate funds or scholarships for future talent to receive co-mentorship from industry and university. And this was kind of along the lines of GOLI and GOLI-like opportunities. So include GOLI and GOLI-like opportunities for all fields of science and engineering to expand to include state government and nonprofits amongst other partners. Okay. The third suggestion is to create an NSF EPSCoR specific small business innovation research, SBIR, and STTR programs specific to EPSCoR states. So again, if you dig in the data and you look at SBIRs and STTRs, collectively, in a collective nutshell, the EPSCoR states tend not to receive or receive as many SBIR and STTRs per capita as other non-EPSCoR states. And so in addition to having EPSCoR specific programs, it could lead to a recruiting tool for co-locating new businesses. The fourth suggestion was to provide interagency partnership opportunities rather than an either or. It's this and this. So an example partnership opportunity would include the Economic Development Administration, Department of Commerce and Industry. In other words, a coordinated economic development strategy through interagency partnerships. This could include NSF incentivizing collaboration and open research regional hub. So again, the suggestions are more detailed, just to provide some prompts of thought and discussion within NSF EPSCoR to support the broader recommendations. Suggestion 5, consider how incentives to attract and retain STEM and research and development focused businesses in an EPSCoR jurisdiction can provide job opportunities to retain high talent researchers, right? This is critical to building a strong workforce within the EPSCoR jurisdictions. And right now it's a challenge to effectively build training opportunities for that workforce. So if we can rethink how we do that through incentives, we would have the ability within EPSCoR jurisdictions to either grow our own and keep them or attract new high talent researchers into the jurisdictions. The second working group was research and infrastructure capacity and competitiveness. And it's two recommendations. Recommendation 3, talent recruitment and enrichment. So NSF should expand current NSF EPSCoR investments in growing the critical mass of top-notch faculty and students and develop new programs that build nationally competitive, sustainable research and promote collaborations within and across jurisdictions. Recommendation 4, physical and administrative infrastructure. NSF should include in its NSF EPSCoR portfolio, enhance funding for building physical and human capacity that supports research and economic development, including construction of modern. So we've seen this one before, right? The modernization of our facilities. But the key to this piece here is not just the research facilities, but the technical personnel to maintain our labs, our corporate engagement offices, right? And staff to support intellectual property development and commercialization, all of which are essential for building the infrastructure for sustainable research, right? So it's not just looking at the research personnel themselves in their labs, it is the whole support infrastructure, right? So a stakeholder public comment that would fit under this that we received. Looking backwards, those Track 1 grants have made lasting and positive impacts in several key areas: the formation of centers and institutes, expansion of physical and computing infrastructure, and faculty hiring. RII Track 1 investments in Maine have funded the creation or expansion of 5 research centers, 3 institutes, and 11 laboratories since 1980. The key to this statement is look at the investments we currently have or have had in the past, and look what what a jurisdiction was able to do. So taking that and thinking through those 2 recommendations I just spoke of, with additional investments, elevate the step function change that can be made within jurisdictions to go beyond just the formation and expansion, but it's the sustainability of this and the growth of this across the entire EPSCoR jurisdiction. Several suggestions that support the 2 recommendations under research infrastructure, capacity, and competitiveness is fund modernization and new construction. Again, you've seen this, right? And research facilities to include cloud-based technologies and shared servers. So it's not only the physical research facilities, but also our high performance computing and cyber infrastructure. It is known that throughout our EPSCoR jurisdictions, we have both a lack of and inability to maintain state-of-the-art research facilities. This type of support could serve to upgrade or create novel research infrastructure to strengthen both education and research. An initiative as such could also include capital expenditure for new statewide shared, large, or movable equipment. Again, thinking through the whole jurisdiction and access to state-of-the-art equipment and facilities. So all institutions, all faculty, all students have access and can participate. And again, tying it, currently NIH has such a program called CO6. So giving a suggestion there of how such a program could be put together. Suggestion 7, expand EPSCoR funding to at least 10 years and allow for more than 1 application per jurisdiction so that multiple research themes can be supported. We all know that those of us in this session right now that are involved in Track 1s, they're 5 years, and in year 4, you're not only going through your 4th year site visit and at the end of that 5-year cycle for that Track 1, you're starting to write a new Track 1, and that's a huge undertaking. So the suggestion is to put funding out for 10 years and allow multiple tracks. And the other reason for the 10 years is part of what we are assessed against is the sustainability, number 1, and not only sustainability of the research, but sustainability into jurisdictional impacts. And it's really hard to see that in 5 years, right? It's hard to have a clear demonstration of significance of sustainable research advancements. It requires more than 10 years, all right? So again, this focuses into a discussion that has been around for a while of modifying the Track 1s and allowing more than 1 per jurisdiction, which is the second bullet. By allowing the submission of more than 1 Track 1 per jurisdiction, a staggered system of overlapping Track 1s could help reduce the boom and bust cycle of large-scale funded programs. Okay. Suggestion 8, build a NRT specifically for EPSCoR jurisdictions. Again, really focusing on the training, recruiting, mentoring, a high quality and diverse doctoral students, but one that is specific to the EPSCoR jurisdictions to provide a higher level of probability for receiving these, to invest in our next generation researchers. Suggestion 9 is to increase co-funding and mechanisms so that grants submitted to NSF that narrowly miss the pay line can be supported. So this is an expansion or rethinking through the co-funding mechanisms that exist today. The third working group is education and workforce development. Recommendation number 5, promoting interjurisdictional research excellence. NSF should explore opportunities to fund regional collaborative proposals involving multiple jurisdictions that can leverage existing expertise and resources to promote synergistic research and educational opportunities that can broaden impacts well beyond what single jurisdictions can accomplish. Again, you're starting to see some common themes here, right? Leveraging collaborations, regional excellence. Recommendation 6, supporting workforce with diverse career pathways, expand research and collaboration opportunities for individuals at different career stages and pathways within NSF EPSCoR funding. Okay. A stakeholder public comment. NSF EPSCoR has resulted in the ability to recruit top faculty, offer new programs and degrees, train thousands of students, support existing industry in the state and region, catalyze new technical startups, and win large competitive rewards. So that's the view of a stakeholder right now. So within the programs that EPSCoR currently has, if we've been able to achieve some of that with additional programming, additional strategic investments, we can take that next step function change and elevate the capacity and competitiveness of our EPSCoR jurisdictions collectively to really be the innovation leader for the country. Suggestions around these 2 recommendations: supported research faculty startup program. And this is to provide substantial support to established tenure track and research faculty, right? And the funds can be used as startup dollars to recruit new faculty and build further capacity. But this really focuses on that middle stage, right? We tend to focus a lot on recruiting new faculty. We need to recruit new faculty. They are our future. We tend not, and we have leadership opportunities for well-established faculty. We tend to not do as well or forget a little bit about the middle part. And so that suggestion really focuses first and foremost on the whole pathway and making sure that there is programming at each step of the pathway to allow faculty to keep progressing in their career. This program needs institutional commitment to recruiting new faculty researcher. So this is suggestions of how that funding can be deployed for new and mid-career faculty members, new lab equipment, other infrastructure. Suggestion 11 is create a track 1 and 2 supplemental funding to increase research competitiveness and support a broader workforce strategy. Again, those of us that work within the track 1, it's $20 million, it's 5 years, it's a $4 million with the match, depending, it's either $4 million in cash or $4 million in kind, depending on each jurisdiction. That number hasn't changed for quite some time. And we're always looking at how do we balance the research and all the other project elements, particularly our education and workforce development. And so this one speaks to supplemental funding to track 1s and 2s that really allows us to focus not only the competitiveness of invest in our mid-level and junior faculty better, right? Normally we hire them, we get them started, but that's it. Now they're on their own. And then another piece of this is on that workforce development, bringing in and supporting and making sure we keep those faculty and we're able to address new high risk and high payoff research efforts by these supported faculty members. Suggestion 12 is to implement a research experience for undergraduate industry partnership. So this is an expansion of what everybody recognizes, the REU. We EPSCoR jurisdictions anybody can apply for REU funding. This program would include a unique call for proposals that highlight partnerships between industry and institutions of higher education. Again, trying to tie what we do as individuals, as institutions, as a collection of institutions to the greater jurisdictional impact. And by making that better connection with industry, we are going to be better able to prepare the education and workforce that we need to continue the economic growth and prosperity within our own jurisdictions. Suggestion 13, support a building excellence in STEM workforce initiative. And again, this is looking at a high-skilled futuristic STEM workforce that can excel within a specific STEM area, focusing on the unique capabilities of region. So putting additional dollars into that. The goal is to build go-to places for conducting advanced research to solve a certain set of STEM problems. NSF EPSCoR would fund a track 2 type multi-jurisdictional program that would focus on a very specific topic that would marry the STEM workforce needs hand in hand with the advanced research taking place, to ensure that once the research as it progresses and it permeates into jurisdictions, that you actually have the workforce that also in place that can then implement the outcomes and the translational aspects of that research. Suggestion 14, fund a building research facilities and institutional management capacity, bridge funds to maintain research administration experience. We all know the EPSCoR projects are, they're very appreciative of the tracks, particularly if you look at the track 1, EPSCoR projects change in focus, the PI changes over time. And so you tend to have the jurisdictional EPSCoR staff that you have on one track 1 develops deep expertise, and then you move to a different track 1 and you may not have that same staff. So how can we buffer that better? By maintaining the research administration expertise. So it transcends across all projects, and it's not a start and stop. Half the component of starting a new track 1 is, or even a track 2, the track 2 is building up that administrative expertise to manage these large awards. So how do we buffer that learning curve, and how do we create sustainability across projects is what this suggestion focuses on. Suggestion 15, offset the cost of administration for institutions with less research administrative capacity in general, your PUIs, some of your minority serving institutions, smaller institutions, by funding for facilities and administrative costs can also contribute to overall institutional research administrative expenses. So what this is saying is that we recognize that as from a jurisdictional perspective, an institution is not an institution, is not an institution. And research universities are better positioned to absorb and provide the administration of these large initiatives than some of our smaller institutions that may have one person, may not have any infrastructure at all. But yet we expect them, we want them to participate. And so they are dealing with a set of issues that this suggestion says we need to help these non-REU institutions build up their research administration expertise that allows them to be full participants and collaborators within these larger EPSCoR initiatives. And lastly is our broadening participation. The 2 recommendations, recommendation 7, proactive inclusion strategies, provide support for the formation of diverse teams of researchers via partnerships between NSF EPSCoR jurisdictions and the active participation of underrepresented groups in all pre and post award facets. And this includes all the NSF EPSCoR programming, inclusion on panels, committees, commissions. So the permeation of diversity and inclusion through everything we do. Recommendation 8, experimentation with new ideas. Provide greater infrastructure support for minority serving institutions, primarily undergraduate institutions and community colleges, to ensure increased engagement with K-12 community organizations and nonprofits, including technical assistance to address administrative challenges, increase research collaborations, and establish innovative mentoring partnerships. Again, you start to see some common threads through all these recommendations. And how do we best move all of our institutions within a jurisdiction up to a competitive level? One listening session participant. I'm from a tribal college, so our students almost by default end up broadening participation. And a lot of research-based research that happens on my campus is culturally tied to the needs that exist in our communities, and it's driven by researchers on my campus who are Native, who are Indigenous. And what that's speaking to, and I don't know which college it is from, but that's really speaking to me when I read this. I read institutional differences, right? And we as an EPSCoR community really need to work hard and understand that each institution within our jurisdiction has a different institutional mission, different institutional goals, different institutional culture, right? I happen to be in North Dakota, and we do collaborate, and we have great partnerships with our tribal colleges. And so when in providing full partnership and access to everything we do, it is our responsibility to also understand these institutional differences in order to ensure that we have complete access and we are allowing partnerships and collaborations. We're allowing the non-RU institutions to be full partners and collaborators and work on things that meet their institutions and their community needs. So the suggestions around these recommendations center MSI, TCU, PUI, CC Brownie participation efforts around culturally responsive, equitable, and valuable collaborations. And these collaborations will counteract current trends towards losing local, highly skilled and trained young professionals, and cultivate multiple pathways to build STEM literacy, STEM education, STEM careers, and STEM entrepreneurship for underserved and underrepresented institutions and the communities they serve. I cannot emphasize that bullet any stronger than I just said it. I think we have an obligation within our jurisdictions to make sure that we are paying attention to, and we understand, and we are learners of the culture within all of our institutions, and how do we best set them up for success within the institutions and in the communities they serve. Explicit efforts to address intersectional impact on academic disparities. This requires the recognition that even within the realm of underserved minorities in STEM, particular groups such as persons with disabilities, neurodiverse individuals, Native Americans, Appalachians, LGBTQ+, and others remain disproportionately underrepresented. And that's a focus area that we had a lot of discussion around, and how do we move that forward? Suggestion 17, support leaders and researchers at underserved, underrepresented institutions through multiple avenues. Earmark funding for new researchers and leaders within these institutions to help build the new generation of researchers and leaders. Encourage these, I'm just going to say these instead of saying all four things, institutions to apply for Track 4 so they can attract highly skilled faculty and support leaders. Suggestion 8, strongly encourage joint research and outreach within community colleges towards building a strong K-14 pathway, considering that many underserved, underrepresented students choose first to join community colleges, so a real emphasis on those community college partnerships. Suggestion 19, extend the Track 1 awards based on results and efforts to build project sustainability, aka merit-based extensions. Again, this ties into moving beyond the 5 years and done, again, to not only create efficiencies, but sustainability that results in long-term jurisdictional impact. Suggestion 20, offer a program similar to NIH's faculty institution recruitment for sustainable transformation, the first program, which provides support for cluster hires of 10 or more new junior faculty members with an emphasis on URMs. We have, our jurisdictions have significant representation from underrepresented minorities, while we face challenges in recruiting them into academic faculty positions. That is, I am going to stop here and entertain any questions at this point. And I'm already 7 minutes over. There's a few minutes for questions, and then I have one last slide which sets up the rest of the next hour of the breakout sessions. Any questions?
So there were quite, well, I'll say a few questions that were entered into the chat. One thing from Jennifer Fowler, those numbers are promising. I think one issue is that EPSCoR funded faculty might be staying, but those that decide, that don't receive funding leave, so the pool is still draining. Do we have more general data on faculty migration?
That is a wonderful question, and I'm looking for Elizabeth. Elizabeth, are you on? Elizabeth or Kevin?
Yeah, I'm here. What was the question?
On, it's around that topic of we are retaining, and in 2013 it said 78% of EPSCoR funded faculty stay. I think it was Jennifer's comment saying that, but the ones that don't get funded are still leaving. Is there any additional data that shows that NSF would have, or NSF EPSCoR would have, that shows out-migration of faculty from EPSCoR jurisdictions to non-EPSCoR jurisdictions? I think that's what the question was.
Yeah, I understand the question. We do not have data on that specifically. No, I'm sorry. It's, that kind of information is really hard to come by, and a lot of it is anecdotal. So I do understand the concern, and that's a great question, but we don't have any data that supports it one way or the other.
Thank you, Elizabeth. We definitely struggle attracting students. Both say that our EPSCoR postdoc plan and associate resources can be a deciding factor. Okay, could be structured like expand QIS program. I'm not sure what that program is. And Jennifer, that would be a great dialogue to have in one of the breakout sessions. Does anyone have details on the new program Alicia is rolling out on improving grants administration capacity? Sandra, do you have any insight into that one?
I'll say Alicia's online. She might have stepped away from the computer, but I'll say in general, the community will hear a lot more about this. We're still in very early efforts on that initiative, but it's definitely an Alicia Needler question, and she's going to definitely engage more with the community around that. I see her coming off camera, so Alicia, you may want to add something.
Yeah, can you repeat the question?
Someone asked, let's see, does anyone have details on the new program you are rolling out on improving grants administration capacity?
Yeah, so that's the granted program, Growing Research Access for Nationally Transformative Equity and Diversity. And so it's an FY23 budget request. So that means that we actually won't get funding until it's appropriated in FY23. The request has been made at $50 million nationally. And so we don't currently have any solicitations. We don't have anything necessarily put to paper other than the focus to build capacity for the research enterprise, which includes research administration, pre and post award, and that kind of stuff. Starting at MSIs, starting with the impact happening within minority serving institutions. And I think I might have said this, I've been presenting on this quite a bit in other places, but that doesn't mean that MSIs are getting the whole of the allocation. It's that the benefit is measured for impact in MSIs. So in an EPSCoR jurisdiction, to the extent that you all know that your minority serving institutions and those who are emerging research institutions are struggling with research administration, being able to serve in a partnership role and set up capacity building activities would be would fall within what we imagine granted to be used for.
Thank you, Alicia. We look forward to seeing more come out on this.
We will keep you all in the loop as more information becomes available.
Thank you. Since I put us behind, that lies on me. I talked a little too long. What I'm going to do is flip to the last slide and set up our breakout rooms. We had intended that you would go into a breakout room for 40 minutes and then we'd have 20 minutes left for reporting out. So I'm going to shorten the breakout room time a little bit so we can get back and get the reporting out. So let me share my screen again, because I have one last slide with the instructions. And so we're holding, we call this the workshop roundtable. We have 4 breakout rooms already set up. They're aligned with the 4 working groups. And I'm assuming that on the fly, we can shorten them down to 30 minutes. So you have 30 minutes to choose. You can choose which working group you want to focus on. Again, education, workforce development, broadening participation, economic development, and research infrastructure, capacity and competitiveness are the 4 working groups. So once you go in there's some homework within each breakout room. You will need to select a lead or overall facilitator just to keep the discussion going. And we also need someone to function as a scribe and capture the discussion so it can be reported out. The breakout room dialogue should center on the suggestions presented. Did we miss the mark? Are things missing? Are there additional suggestions? And the key word is suggestions. The recommendations have already been presented to CIAS in February and are considered final. So we're really focusing on the suggestion piece, which are those details of what type of programs would you suggest to fit the recommendations. And don't worry about not remembering the suggestions. Within each breakout room will be a person that will share those sets of suggestions for that breakout room so you can refer back to them. After 30 minutes, we'll come back to the larger audience. It will be recorded and we'll have a report out from each of the scribes so we can capture that dialogue. So the actual subcommittee, we can take a look at it before we finalize the report and say, we captured everything, we missed a few things, we have a few things to tidy up. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to turn it over to Cyber Synergy and they can give us instructions for going into the breakout room.
Sure. Thanks so much, Carly.
Yep.
So what we're going to do at this time is we're going to go ahead and open all of the rooms. The facilitators who will be sharing screen have already been assigned, so they should be automatically swept away. Folks, you should see a notification pop up in your Zoom window, allowing you to select the breakout room of your choice. Between the 4, we have economic development, research and infrastructure, education and workforce development, and broadening participation. So I'll go ahead and open those rooms up. If you need assistance getting to your room, please just let us know and someone from our team will be able to assist you in getting you to the room of your desire. Alrighty, enjoy your discussion. Okay, if it doesn't automatically pop up, in the bottom of your Zoom window where all of your action icons are, you should see a breakout rooms icon with 4 boxes. If you select that, you should be able to see all of the rooms that are of option. You can either give us a message in the chat with the room you'd like to go to if you're having trouble, or you can come off of mute and let us know who you are and where you'd like to go if you're needing additional assistance.
I think everyone's back. Everybody's coming back, all the breakout rooms. Hopefully, we had a very vibrant discussion in the economic development breakout room. So hopefully the other three were like-minded, and we actually got a few new suggestions from what we had presented. So we only have like 13 minutes left. And so the purpose of this last 13 minutes is to report out so we can capture the discussion. So the subcommittee can take a look at this discussion and make adjustments or inclusions and additions to the final report before we actually finalize it. So since I was in the economic development breakout room, I'm going to ask Marion to start first.
Thanks, Kelly. Yeah, it was a great discussion. There was a lot of focus on partnerships, partnerships between federal agencies and EPSCoR, and support for that around being able to expand the effectiveness of economic development missions at a jurisdiction-wide level, with a coordination, for instance, of funding that goes to support brick and mortar and funding that goes to support the equipment and instrumentation that can be used in those spaces. There was a lot of discussion around partnership with industry and innovative ways that EPSCoR can promote partnerships with industry, particularly exchange of personnel between students and faculty and personnel within industry back and forth to create stronger relationships and opportunities, including the need for qualified personnel to help support SBIRs and STTRs in industry, especially SBIRs, and the need for the university partners to help and be able to support SBIR proposal development. There was a discussion about also partnerships across EPSCoR jurisdictions and between EPSCoR jurisdictions and non-EPSCoR jurisdictions to find pathways for EPSCoR states to have more access to other federally funded programs and even NSF funded programs like ERCs or STCs. There just aren't enough pathways right now, but thoughtful approach to how funding can be used to support EPSCoR jurisdictions in seeking those partnerships and making those partnerships while also providing incentive and funding to the non-EPSCoR jurisdictions to support those partnerships is really necessary. There was a discussion about the fact that state economic development partners or jurisdiction economic development partners generally don't have, well, let's say their appreciation varies significantly for the impact that universities have and the contribution of universities to economic development. So there was a talk of the need for support for government relations and other relations functions in the EPSCoR jurisdictions to help promote that message more effectively, that universities are significant contributors to economic development, and how there's potentially a need to fund or make those conversations more available through perhaps workshops, funded workshops. And there was some debate back and forth about whether there should be SBIR, special SBIR funding dedicated to EPSCoR jurisdictions and some of the pros and cons of that.
Thank you so much, Marion, for that thorough report out. Let's move to education and workforce development next. Just as a reminder, we have about 9 minutes for the next 3, so about 3 minutes apiece. So who was the scribe for education and workforce development?
That was me.
Hey, Nicholas.
Hello. Yeah, so I thought we had a good discussion too, just to try to briefly go through it. We kind of went through suggestion by suggestion. So the first 2 suggestions are creating a faculty startup program and then increasing research competitiveness to support broader workforce. So those kind of maybe go together a little bit. For the first suggestion about the startup program, we were a little thought maybe this would better go under research infrastructure. We're not quite sure how it would go with the research, the current way we do the track 2s anyway. And there was also a suggestion that maybe it could be broadened a little bit, because part of the goal, like for PUIs, they're not necessarily recruiting research faculty. So to maybe make that a little bit more inclusive to also recruit teachers and educators as well. Let me see what else I have written up here. And the other thing for the PUIs is that even small amounts of startup can go a long way there in terms of recruitment, because some PUIs have very little to no startup available for new faculty. So small amounts of startup so it doesn't have to be a lot of money necessarily for some universities. For the suggestion 11 to create supplements for increasing research competitiveness, overall, I thought we like this suggestion. I think there was, there was some suggestion that really this should be focused on mid-career faculty, because the track 4s are available to early career faculty. So there's thought there that maybe just really making sure that it's focused heavily on the mid-career faculty, people going from associate to full professor. But also along with that, though, not just on the tenure track, there are lots of research staff now that are not on the tenure track. So if there's a way to include them in this suggestion as well. Some instructors have small research appointments or on 3-year terms, and also there's obviously there's research scientists and those kind of faculty as well that may not fit into the traditional tenure track. Let's see. Suggestion 12 and 13 were about developing research experiences for undergraduates with industry partnerships, then building at the STEM education workforces. So that we thought these 2 kind of went together. We like suggestion 12 a lot. We thought that would be, aligns really well with the direction of NSF, and also several of the people in the room said that their universities are already doing things like this. So this would be a good way to kind of formalize that and provide a funding mechanism for it. So I think there was really no negative comments on that one. For suggestion 13, supporting building excellence in STEM workforce initiative, we thought it was a little bit broad. Wasn't clear how this would be accomplished. So maybe just a little bit of information on what types of activities would be supported would make that one a little bit more clear and give us a better stand. And also there's a suggestion to separate it by K-12, undergraduate, postgraduate, to make it clear at each of those different education levels how this is going to be done. And the last 2 quickly. So suggestion 14 was about building research facilities and institutional management capacity. We were a little bit confused on this one because it wasn't clear whether it was talking about adding additional EPSCoR staff or just maintaining current staff. So that was, there were a couple of EPSCoR staff members on the call, and they both said they like this in principle because they do feel like they're overextended. There's, a lot of these states have maybe 5 people on their staff. And so bringing in people with specific skills like website development or that could allow them to do more of their core activities more thoroughly. So there was support for this, but just a little bit of clarification on how exactly it's going to work and if it's talking about new staff or keeping current staff. And the last suggestion, offsetting the cost of administration for institutions. I think overall we supported this one. Just again, maybe broadening it to go beyond the research part of it and include the education component that many of the schools are also strong in, because there's a need for administrative capacity for course development and classroom related stuff as well. So I think that was all. If I missed anything, anybody else that was in that room, feel free to chime in, but try to keep it short.
That was a wonderful summary, Nicholas. Thank you so much. So we've had 2 great summaries so far. How about research infrastructure, competitive and capacity and competitiveness next? Who's up for that one?
Okay.
Prakash.
Yeah. So we had a lot of discussion about the track 1. first of all, there was a suggestion that maybe, the committee has got so many different suggestions that, when we make those recommendations, that the NSF or the EPSCoR office may not know kind of what to prioritize. So there was a suggestion that, that maybe we should be able to, or the committee should be able to kind of identify, some of the key suggestions as the priority areas. And my response to that also was that, like in the committee, we did receive for each of those working groups a large number of suggestions. And we were asked, in fact, to kind of narrow it down to, so what we have made currently, what the suggestions are available, they are kind of selected suggestions. But I think that's something that the committee can look into to try to see whether we need to further fine tune or, let the NSF EPSCoR decide as to what should be the priority areas. There was a lot of discussion about track 1 in terms of the duration. Majority felt like, a 5-year duration is not enough, and that maybe it should be extended to 10 years, like some of the IDEA programs have had. And then there were a lot of discussion about how can we accomplish that, either through, looking at the outstanding progress that we made in the first 5 years, or through a competitive renewal type of application where they will look at the previous, progress and things like that. There was also discussion about the $20 million, may not be enough right now, based on the fact that, as everybody knows, track 1 involves, so many different institutions, so many different types of programs in addition to research. So therefore, the funding for track 1 should be increased. There was interesting debate about, trying to have more than one track. Right now, we only have one track 1. Each state, each EPSCoR jurisdiction can submit. So there were suggestions. Some felt like, their states had many more ideas or, topics that they could easily, submit for more than one, like 2 or 3. But some jurisdictions felt like, they had only maybe one major strength. So if we are trying to increase the number of tracks, then we need to make sure that these additional tracks will not compete for the original track 1, because, we want to make sure that each EPSCoR jurisdiction will have ability to compete at least for one track. There were suggestions, there were concerns about, if you try to increase the tracks per jurisdiction, then how do you try to administer those? Because you'll clearly need additional people, because right now to manage only one track 1, it does involve a lot of administrative work. So there was a lot of that kind of discussion about track 1. And then there was also discussion about recruitment of junior faculty in terms of, like having a COBRE-like program we talked about, or whether, that we should try to, have, whether we should have an independent program like the COBRE, or whether we should expand the current track 1 where you can recruit junior faculty and mentor them as well. There were a lot of questions about, concerns about why our junior faculty or mid-career faculty leave for non-EPSCoR jurisdictions. And that also raised the question about the fact that they may not have the adequate research facilities, core facilities, as well as, opportunities that the non-EPSCoR states may have. And that brought to the next question about suggestion about, trying to build the research infrastructure in terms of renovation of the labs and, providing better facilities for and to attract and retain junior faculty as well as mid-career senior faculty. And there was also suggestion that maybe NSF should look at trying to not just renovate the space like some of the NIH CO6 programs have, but also try to create new infrastructure, like new buildings, for example, which are kind of deficient in EPSCoR states. And we talked about America Competes Act, where there could be much more funding available for, if it passes, available for the EPSCoR states. There was also discussion about, not to kind of have these track 1, track 2, track 4 being isolated, and whether we can do something to kind of synergize these various track 1s. And lastly, we didn't have much time, but there was one of the PIs from track 2 talked about, how can the faculty have some teaching release time, as well as what are some of the ways that they can help retain the faculty and things like that. And I think that teaching release time was I think discussed with respect to certain PUIs as well, and as well as the retention. So I think that's pretty much what I have. And if I miss something, the people who are there, feel free to chime in.
Thank you so much, Prakash. I know we're a minute or two over. Do we have time to squeeze in the report out from broadening participation?
Yes, let's go ahead and hear from broadening.
All right, thank you so much. Who was ascribed for broadening participation? Edwin.
That would be me, yeah. And it turns out that it can be summarized very simple. In broad strokes, as paraphrasing what somebody said, the points that we bring in the report are very aspirational, but they fall short in terms of actionable activities. So a lot of our discussions circle around that the vocabulary being too vague, and that vagueness tends to lend itself to underinterpretation, especially when you have changes in committees or in administration. The people that are supposed to be implementing these actions would tend to underinterpret what the spirit of suggestions were or recommendations. I don't remember what the right word is right now. There were also some people pointed out to some words that we use in the report that are not sort of, I guess, permitted within the lingo of NSF, like earmark, which is not a word that we can use. There were also a lot of comments about some common themes that have happened across multiple discussions, like the restraints in time for tribal colleges and HBCUs and primarily teaching institutions, in which trying to implement more research may run into problems of implementation because of contractual obligations in terms of teaching time of their faculty, the overburdening your faculty with having to do teaching and outreach, and then on top of that, serving in a lot of committees, and on top of that, doing research as well. So what the participants would have liked to see is a little bit more specific language, number one, and number two, more concrete ideas that can be implemented to alleviate the issues that we point out. I see some people raising their hands, so moderators, please. I think Loretta has her hand up.
All right, I'm not seeing any hands. Loretta, did you have your hand up?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't see any hands up on my screen.
So if anyone wants to jump in and add to what I just said.
Okay, I think you may have accurately summarized everything that happened in the broadening participation breakout. Did you have any closing words, Kelly?
Certainly, I want just to thank everyone for joining this 2-hour session. It's so critically important for NSF EPSCoR to hear the comments, the dialogue, the discussion. It was a great dialogue. And I do appreciate the time you have put into this. The committee, circling back as soon as we get this recording, we can take a look at. There are some great new ideas, new suggestions that came out, and I know on behalf of the subcommittee, we are very grateful for that broader perspective. And so, again, thank everyone. I know we went a little over, and that's on me because I spoke too long. So sorry for sending this a little bit over time, but I think this was a very valuable exercise. We got a lot of great discussion out of it.
Any
Thank you
quick
so much, Kelly.
question?
Sorry, we're going to go ahead and transition into our next section, which will be a panel. We're going to hear from our program officers in EPSCoR. So at this time, if they could come on camera, I will give the floor over to them.
I'm going to ask one of our delightful colleagues to kick us off. Jean, you popped up on my camera first. I don't know if you were intending to, but if someone maybe can just do some introductions so we can structure the session, that'll be great.
I apologize. I have laryngitis today, so it's going to be hard to talk. But my impression is this session is your chance to ask a program officer anything, including how you might want to be a program officer here sometime. So I'm going to turn this over to my colleagues to manage the discussion.
One of the things that's my greatest hope, just putting this out there, is that you interact with us all the time, right? And, you know, probably you're sick of us by this point, but here's a chance, a unique chance to get all of us as a collective, right, as a hive mind of program officers to really ask about anything that sort of isn't of interest to you.
I can also say some great examples are, do you have any information on not necessarily solicitations, but challenge ways to engage better with NSF, ways to learn more about submitting proposals to EPSCoR or other NSF specific programs. What's it like to be a program officer? What helps us do our work every day? Anything. You can ask anything.
Jeff has his hand up. Go for it, Jeff.
I'll take the prompt from, oh, I'm going to pronounce this wrong. I'm so sorry. Chinoye?
Chichi.
Chichi. That's not how it's spelled, but okay. Thank you, Chichi. I'll take her prompt and ask, what is it like to be a program officer?
Well, since I gave the prompt, I guess I should answer first, and I'm also going to change my name at the same time because I'm multi-talented. So being a program officer for me is a very service-oriented position. So I have a service-oriented nature to my personality. And the work that I do is in service to the country, to the scientific community that we serve, as well as making sure that we are able to carry out our mission. So for me, being able to have a service-oriented mission is very important for my natural personality and professional traits. Some of the things that I love about being a program officer is that I'm able to engage with folks within the scientific community at multiple career levels. I'm able to work with amazing colleagues on my team and throughout NSF. I could walk down the hall at NSF if I was physically there and talk to the nearest expert on artificial intelligence and get a quick brief and then come back and share with my team members. But I also really enjoy stimulating research, stimulating programs that help benefit the careers and the ability to build capacity, especially within our community. I think that from my prior experience, I've had wonderful opportunities to broaden participation in STEM. And so working here at NSF enables me to do that at a larger, more national level. And so overall, over time, the work that we do has an impact and benefits the country. So that's my quick answer, but I'll also ask my colleagues to chime in.
Happy to go next. My career was sort of an interesting one. I spent most of it at primarily undergraduate institutions, rolling through sort of all the way through sort of, tenure and so forth, and all the way to a department chair. And one of the things that sort of happened when I moved to NSF is I made the realization that I was always in an under-resourced institution. For example, I developed our first SPO office at my second institution. And knowing where, and also I'd been involved in writing and playing significant roles in track ones, roles in track twos, I've been where you've been. And so the thing that really I enjoy the most is understanding the complex problem that is research capacity building. Intellectually, I find it just fascinating. And so working, and that's the first piece, but then also working with all of you, I think it came up in the breakout session, how every single EPSCoR jurisdiction is an individual. They're all different. And understanding those unique problems and how they fit within the context of the larger story of the US global scientific enterprise. How do we build that in a way that's smart, real, and also leverages the very limited resources that we have in EPSCoR? We're only 2% of the EPSCoR budget, right? There's another 98% for you to go after. So therefore, the things that I find fascinating is working out ways and creating ways to help you all develop pathways to make that accessible to you, right? And that just fascinates me and excites me. And every time I, talk to Ray or Terry or, one of you, or the track two groups, Jeff, and just have these fascinating discussions. It's just fantastic to be able to see that from your perspective and then work out what I can do to help you all really build that scientific enterprise and make the transition to being global and national leaders possible. It's as simple as that. And I think that's really cool, right? And, we do that as much as we can.
I'll jump in now. This is Subrata Acharya, and see a lot of familiar folks over here. Dawn, Vesna, hi. I know Nick was there. But I come in from computer science and cyber, and I come in with academic experience, nearly 15 years. So I take the participation of females and underrepresented minorities in our fields very, very seriously. Now, I used to teach the undergrad calculus, algorithms, finite state automata, those things, the freshman courses. And I see why in a class of 30 students, I still have 3. And I'm from Maryland. I'm not from an EPSCoR jurisdiction. So I always contemplated that. And the thing that attracted me to EPSCoR specifically is how science is pervasive. STEM is pervasive. Our projects with West Virginia, where we have music majors producing apps for computational thinking and computer technology, so that transition, that ambassador which I can be for science is so satisfying, so gratifying that I'm here. I'm just pulled down by this COVID pandemic, but I'd love to move in and do that. But that has been my motivation, and the team, the learning we do through NSF and throughout has been instrumental. So if you are thinking, please, please, please come in, serve here as IPAs, as program officers. And I know Sandra says that a lot, but that'll be very, very valuable, coming in this side of the fence where policy and solicitations are designed and you can make a difference.
Okay, so just sort of cutting off here, I've just noticed the creative juices are now flowing with questions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bounce between sort of Edwin first, then I'm going to go to one in the chat and then to Vesna. Okay, so Edwin, do you want to jump in?
I just wanted to ask what the recruitment process is like. And related to that, do you get pushback from institutions that don't want to let go of their faculty?
I'll just jump in with one sentence, Jerry, here. So I hadn't taken a sabbatical in 14 years, so they didn't tell me anything. but yes, there is sometimes pushback, and there is sometimes, because when I teach digital forensics, I teach all those specific areas. If they don't find me, they have to find somebody from NASA, DOD, and not NASA, but NSA, DOD, and so it's hard. So I get that, but I didn't get it personally.
So Edwin, to answer your question, I did get pushback from my institution, and it was real. But I think one of the nice things was that I was recruited for the CREST program in HRD, and at the time I was the associate director for CREST. And the problem with our institutions, it's an HBCU, the University of Maryland Eastern Shore, is that there's usually just one of you. And, you know, my department chair said, well, who's going to do your work if you go? And, you know, that's not really how it should work. And that shouldn't be the question. It's like if you leave, hopefully you'll come back, you'll gain knowledge from NSF and bring that back to the institution. But sometimes your institutions don't see it that way. But the good thing was that since we did have a $5 million CREST program, our institution had to think about that. Do you want to have a fight with NSF, or do you want to just be nice and say, okay, let me release her of all her projects that she's doing and find someone else to do those. So sometimes there is pushback.
So basically it's two things you have to do in parallel is negotiate with your institution and also go through the recruitment process at NSF. And at the end, they have to agree. So.
And let's bounce to our second question. This is from the Louisiana jurisdiction. Are there any plans for an EPSCoR program or specific programs / departments looking to grow and be competitive? For example, a department / program with 2 to 3 PI obtains funds to enhance competitiveness in research and education, especially at schools that are nominally PhD granting, but the program department itself does not grant a PhD. So that's a really interesting one. You know, again, my advice, and actually, you know, Sandra and Andrew, you know, you may have some ideas from DOE where some of this may come around, or DGE. But the one thing that you've got to really assess within your own departments, having been in exactly this position myself, is you've got to assess the culture of your institution and understand exactly where they're at and what resources they have in their general scheme of things, right? And I think if you think of it in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, understanding where it falls and what you can push internally to build the culture within your institution, and figuring out what the administration can actually push in, given all of the other pulls and pushes within your home institutions, allows you to start realizing where you are and then finding programs that then can then move you in a position you really well. I'll leave it to my colleagues for the rest of the question, and then we'll jump to Vesna.
I'll chime in really quickly because we just closed our Track 4 EPSCoR Research Fellows competition last week, which included an additional track that supported early career investigators from institutions not well represented in STEM to conduct Track 4 fellowships. And that track included opportunities for individuals from primarily undergraduate institutions and 2-year institutions, as well as minority serving institutions, to do a fellowship at a NASA research center. So those type of opportunities we try to develop so that we can understand how to better engage in outreach with faculty from institutions such as primarily undergraduate institutions, and we'll hopefully be able to continue doing those pilots so we can learn from them and to be able to learn how to do outreach so that those opportunities are well available and knowledgeable to you so that there'll be more participation.
Great, let's move on to, has anyone else got anything on this one? Just checking. Okay, Vesna, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, it's kind of related when you mentioned, but it's a completely different question on a different topic. When you mentioned how you are actually yourself being EPSCoR grantee and then move you. So we've been using our funding to apply for really big grants. Actually, we're just invited, as you know, for EFRC, and we put that together with DOE. So big thing, right? And it was really, you know, all the PIs are basically that were in this program, and that's what allowed us to actually do that. But, you know, chances of getting it are small, right? So I think we have a lot of momentum. So my question was, is there a way, and I think when we applied, it was that this is a 4-year grant, and then there was something about a possibility to apply for these extra 2 years of funding. Is this still on the table or no? No, none of that exists.
No, none of that. You know, as I say, we're constantly looking for alternative pathways, and we're constantly reevaluating, you know, the program and Track 2 in particular, right? one of my personal interests is, I see track 1s and track 2, and again, this is speaking for myself, is really the meat in the sandwich, right? This is that opportunity to bring humans together to do something extraordinary with that funding. And as I sort of commented in my opening comments, we're just 2% of the program. So, how do what I'm interested in is that gap, that bridging gap between sort of exactly what you're talking about, and this is something that's coming hopefully out of future of EPSCoR, as we're seeing that progresses, is understanding what we as NSF can do to help you then bridge those gaps to that, and
maybe we were shooting too much, but our QLCI proposal, for these quantum leap challenge institutes, I'd be happy to show you the reviews. But anyway, the sign, they told us that it's too forward thinking. I was like, you asked for a leap, so it's like there's a sweet point. It's almost like, is this enough? Now we're being accused that we're too forward thinking, because
it's kind of like you're applying for your first job. You need experience to get it, but you don't have, I know, I get it.
And then they said you're too qualified, so it's like, what's the, so yeah.
And I think this is something that we're in the office is struggling, constantly asking those questions. I know that my colleagues think about it all the time, about how to really bring you to that next level and really how to build that. Subrata, you had something to add?
Yes. So since like you mentioned quantum, Vesna, I would definitely strongly advise you to just connect with the newly formed TIP Directorate. They did mention about some of those engagement support. That would be a great way to, because they're rolling faster instead of waiting for a year long for resubmission. So if you think you want
which one exactly, if you
I will put that in the chat.
Thank you, because the one with the extension, we were not qualified, neither Dartmouth nor Brown. We had too much funding. You see, there's a catch-22. There was a quantum So
if you have an industrial lead, then they could be and you could be
okay. I'll look into when you put in chat. Thank you. Yep. Thank you.
Okay, the next question that's on the list here, wait a minute. This is from Alaska. Various questions have come up during our last award period. Subawards. If we're an EPSCoR state, are we allowed to do a subaward with an entity that is a non-EPSCoR state? Remote work. If a current senior investigator moves out of state to a non-EPSCoR state, can they still stay involved in the project? Do any of my colleagues want to hit those? I can hit both of them, but everyone gets sick of my voice.
So I think with the subaward question, that is typically a case-by-case basis because not all subawardees are the same. We have to be cognizant of our congressional mandate to ensure that EPSCoR funds go to EPSCoR jurisdictions, and when NSF makes an award, it goes to an institution. So when we're making that award, looking at the subawardee and understanding the scope of work and the greater contribution to the overall project is part of the evaluation that goes into whether or not funds can go outside of an EPSCoR state. But we have our initial congressional mandate that we also keep in mind. And so unfortunately, that question is not a yes or no, it's a it depends answer. For the remote work question, I think similarly it depends, but if you were previously funded on a project that has gone to your institution, you're still affiliated with that institution, but you're not necessarily in the same jurisdiction. There's some gray area, I think, in that case. Again, the funding goes to an institution, but we are also trying to invest and make workforce development investments within the jurisdiction. So I think it depends on the situation. I'm sorry I couldn't give you a more straightforward answer, but typically we do try to stay within the congressional mandate that we have to maintain.
I can say that for moving out of state, especially when we do co-funding, if a PI moves out of an EPSCoR jurisdiction, we no longer support them. but I can see where there may be a gray area, but they can still participate, but funding from EPSCoR would not be allowed.
And that's the same for track 4. If a track 4 PI moves to an institution that's not within EPSCoR jurisdiction, they can't take their funds with them. And they can't find another replacement PI. We usually terminate that award. That's in solicitations.
I just want a clarification on that question. Does that mean that the PI is gone, that he resigned from the institution, or he's still working in the institution but remotely from another state? Because that's different. So.
If we answer it sort of all 3 ways, the easiest way I can think to explain it, if they remain at the institution as their primary employer, right? So if they've left, say, University of Alaska to go somewhere else to a non-EPSCoR jurisdiction, and they've left the University of Alaska to go to a non-EPSCoR jurisdiction, they are then may only continue in the project as an unfunded collaborator. And again, that's sort of how that works. Now, if they remain primarily employed by that institution, i.e. that is their primary place, then what will happen, and they move out of state just because they like living in a non-EPSCoR station, say that you live in Idaho and you want to live over in Pullman, right? Then that's a wash, right? You're working at the University of Idaho. So, you know, that's sort of the different sort of nuances there. Another question that came in, this is from the Alaska jurisdiction, which is great. Why are the annual reports due at the end of June when the project year's in September of that year? Most of our work is done July to August, so it's sometimes difficult to estimate expenditures made in May and June. Oops, sorry, my thing moved. I've been curious why the reports are due 3 months prior to the project year end. The answer is it's NSF rules, right? This is required in the PAPPG. We have zero control over that. But the rule is that when we look at those expenditures, what we expect is you make your best guess when that project award anniversary date is. And if it is not at the 20% sort of left in the kitty, if you have more than that, then we require you to go through your SPO office to give us a revised budget, right? So, you know, again, we're stuck within the rules or the federal rules just as anyone else is for that.
Yeah, so your report is actually 9 months and not 12. So keep that in mind.
Yeah. Especially in that first year. And I think you all sometimes have, we've got to report everything in the first year, you know, where we're well aware that we see it as that first 9 months, you know. This is from Michelle. So a question about EPSCoR workshops. Can we have non-EPSCoR attendees, US and international, if they pay their own expenses? Attendees, not speakers, that's clear. So who's Andrea Sobrati, you guys run workshops?
Yep, so I can take it and then Andrea could add in. So the funds have to be dispersed to EPSCoR jurisdiction speakers, participants, you know, the EPSCoR funds stay in EPSCoR jurisdictions. We have had experts who come in through a virtual medium to you know, help support, advertise, or collaborate for future you know, projects. That has happened. Specifically in one of the quantum projects, this has happened. So yes, but the funds is a no. Like, you know, the fund allocation stays in EPSCoR. Andrea?
Yeah, you can have non-EPSCoR. We're not limiting you to the types of individuals that can attend your conference. It's just where the support goes. But if you do want to have speakers and they're in non-EPSCoR institutions or jurisdictions, you can support those speakers for this. It's just that the attendees, it should be restricted funding-wise to those in EPSCoR jurisdictions.
Great, thank you both. I'm just going to round this up just very quickly. Jean put in a quick thing in the chat regarding annual reports. This is certainly a frustration. We need the 3 months to get your next award increment out before the FY in September. So we want to make sure that you get your next increment in a timely fashion. That's also a key point that we also missed. For Edwin's question, this may have been asked before. The Track 2 supplements to collaborate with HBCUs. Was that a one-time thing? Is there any movement towards a new round of those? Watch this space. No promises, but we're thinking seriously about that and we're considering it at the moment. So we would be very excited to offer again. It depends on budgets and many other factors far beyond sort of our control. But we hear you, we know it was successful, and we're excited. So with that, we are 1 minute over. So what I'll do is just on behalf of the EPSCoR POs, thank you all for attending. Thank you for great questions. And never be afraid to reach out to us, right? You know, that's what we're here for. Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye.